So before we can start using Unity's new input system, we need to understand a few core concepts. There are only a handful, and once you understand them, everything else makes sense. So first you have input actions. An input action is something the player wants to do, like move, jump, or shoot. Then you have bindings. A binding is the button, key, or joystick that triggers that action. Then you have action maps. An action map is simply a group of related actions. For example, you might have a player map for gameplay and UI map for menus. Then you have a control scheme. A control scheme tells Unity which devices the player is using, such as keyboard and mouse, or gamepad, or VR controls. And Unity can switch between them automatically. Finally, all of these are stored inside an input action asset, which is where you create and manage your entire input setup. That's all you really need to know to work with Unity input system. With these concepts out of the way, let's build our input system from scratch. So I'm starting with an empty scene and an empty project folder. I'm going to right click and create my first input asset. I'm going to call it my player controls. Press enter. Then I'm going to open up the editor. Inside of the editor, we're going to create our first action map. I'm going to call it player. Inside the player, I will create all the actions related to player gameplay actions. So we're going to start off with move. I already have an action inside, so I'm just going to rename it to move. Since movement has both horizontal and vertical directions, I'm going to change the action type to value and control type to vector 2. Here we go. Now inside of move, there's already a binding, but I'm going to press delete and create my own binding. Now I'm going to right click on move, add up, down, left, right composite. Since movement with keyboard is a composite action, I'm going to open it up. Then I'm going to specify up, down, left, right buttons. So for up, we're going to have W keyboard. For down, we got S keyboard. For left, we got A keyboard. For right, we got D keyboard. That's it. I'm going to control S or click save asset. Then I'm ready to use my player controls. Now let's hook this up to a game object. I'm going to click game object, 3D object, create a sphere, press enter. Then I'm going to add player input component to this sphere. I'm also going to assign my player controls I created earlier to the actions of this player. You're going to see the default map is player, since this is the only one we have. I'm also going to change the behavior to invoke Unity events. Next, I'm going to create an empty C# auto behavior. Right click, create, scripting, auto behavior script. I'm going to call it sphere movement and press enter. It's going to take a second to compile. Then I'm going to drag and drop it onto the sphere like this. Once I've done that, if I open up the events of player input, I can see the player action map and also the move action I declared in my player controls. So right now, my player controls is already hooked up with the sphere. We're just not doing anything with it yet, which is our next step. So I'm going to open up the sphere movement and delete everything. Then I'm going to type public void on move input action callback context. So the context is where the values of my input is stored. So I'm going to read the values like this. Move input equals context, read value, vector 2. I don't have a move input, so I'm going to declare one. Private vector 2 move input. Now I need to make this move input do something. I'm going to create the update method And inside of this, I'm going to type transform, translate, movement input, multiply by time, the delta. I'm also going to multiply it by another value called move speed, like so. I press Ctrl S and back to the inspector. Wait for everything to compile. I'm going to click on the sphere and set the move speed to, say, 5. I'm going to go to Events, Player, press on the plus button, and drag and drop the sphere here. Sphere movement on move. Ctrl S. I'm going to enter play mode. And I can see the movement is hooked up. So how about we add another action to my player controls? I'm going to open up the editor again. And inside of the player action map, I'm going to right click, add action. I'm going to call change color. I want it to work like this. Whenever I press a button, I want the sphere to change color. So I'm going to add a binding. I'm going to bind it to space. Space keyboard, Control S, and close the editor. Now, if I click on the sphere and open up the events, I can see I have the change color action inside my player. But I don't have a function that actually changes the color of the sphere. So here's what I do. I'm going to open up the sphere movement. And I'm going to create a function called public void change color. Input action, callback context. And inside of this context, I'm going to say if context started, set the color to red, else set the color to white. So in order to set the color, I need to access the renderer of this component, which I'm going to do it like this. The start function, I'm going to get component, mesh renderer. I'm going to keep it in my properties. So now on change color, I'm going to simply write mesh renderer dot material color red. Delete the comment. And in the else, I'm going to write material color white. And in here, I'm going to say context cancel. Now I'm going to go back to the inspector. Wait a second to compile. Now I'm going to click on the sphere, open up events, player, and I'm going to assign the function I wrote to change color callback. Change color. Control S, enter play mode. Now when I press space, it's going to change red. When I release the space, it's going to go back to white, like this. Now, what if I also want to support the gamepad? I'm going to open up my player controls. And to move and change color, I'm going to assign more bindings. So for move, I'm going to right click, add binding. This time I'm going to do add binding and not a composite binding because it's not a keyboard and it has its own binding for a gamepad. I'm going to click on gamepad, left stick. And for change color, I'm going to add another binding. I'm going to bind it to West. West is this button. Then I'm going to Control S. I have my gamepad already attached. So I'm going to play. Now this movement is happening with my gamepad, trust me. And the West button, which is on my Xbox controller, the X button, is changing the color. Now, what if I also want to make it move with my mouse? So I'm going to open up my play controls again. Under move, I'm going to add another binding. And I'm going to bind it to Delta mouse. Control S. Close the editor and enter play mode. And now the movement is happening with my mouse. And that's all there is to it. You've learned the core concepts of Unity's new input system, created your own input action asset, configured a movement action, connected it with player input components, and used it to control a sphere. From here, adding more complicated action follows the exact same workflow. Once you understand this foundation, building more advanced input systems becomes much easier. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.